Yes, I can. 1 + 1 equals 3. I'm David. I lead something called the Nature of Cities. It's a big thrill, and I'm very grateful to be invited to speak to you today. And also, it's a great thrill for me to share the stage with Edith Guzman, who we've just finished a big art exhibit together that she's going to be talking about, called Shade. So really, thank you so much for being here. As Annie mentioned, I am both a scientist, or originally a scientist. I'm maybe more science friendly now than I am a scientist, and an artist. So this idea of putting science and art together is something that I'm feel very strongly about. Feel very keenly about putting these two things together. As I do about putting joined conversations of all different kinds of ways of knowing and modes of action together, because I fundamentally believe that they create new knowledge that we would not have had before. So Charles Birchfield is a landscapist from early in the 20th century. He actually started out as a designer of wallpaper, but he also was a landscape artist, principally with in watercolors. This is an example of some of his work. He was also a great journalist. Over his lifetime, he wrote 10,000 pages in his journal. And it was there that he wrote, "It is difficult to take in the glory of the dandelion as it is to take in a mountain or a thunderstorm." Well, what did he mean by that? He was creating a landscape. As we know, landscapes have depth, they have width, they have lots of detail, but there's also something magically bigger than the collection of details. He's created depth to it. He's put the dandelions in front. He's put the dragonflies a little further behind. There's lots of richness there. He's trying to capture something that is fundamentally multidisciplinary, fundamentally multi-dimensional, which a lot of us are trying to do in science and in policy and in art. So how do we take in the glory of a dandelion or a mountain or a forest or a city or a landscape? It's through acts of imagination. This is the fundamental thing. If you remember one thing that I said today, it's this, that it is imagining these complicated, understanding, unpacking these complicated entities we call landscapes or multidimensional entities. It is through acts of imagination that we will more greatly understand them. Well, whose imagination? What imagination? Well, imagination linking ideas to expression, science imagination that links to policy, policy imagination that connects the idea of knowledge and the people's will and what they need, artistic design, imagination that envisions new ways to think about place, imagination from the people about what they want, what they deserve, how they want to live. All of these, I assert that all of these modes of imagination can find their best expression, possibly their only expression, when they are more interconnected with each other, more tied together in terms of ideas and action and creation. When we do such a thing, then all of our work can be expanded into a bunch of realms that are described in some of these words here: creative, knowledge-based, collaborative, open, tolerant, innovative, secure, productive. These are the words that would amplify not just the words, the work of artists and creatives, although these are often words that are associated with those types of people, but also scientists and policymakers and practitioners. These are the words we all want to strive for as we create a better sense of storytelling about the work that we're trying to do, about the places that we're trying to create. I want to say that that one of the things that we'll be talking about here is a collaboration between Nature of Cities and the Forest Service around an arts science residency program. And many of the pictures you're going to see here are from artists who have been part of this project since 2016, and Nature of Cities joined as a partner in 2019. We often talk about, in our work as practitioners or scientists or as community builders, we often talk about the idea of value. What is something worth? How much does it cost? Well, I want to make a subtle distinction between the idea of value, worth, and the idea of values. What do we believe in? What do we care about? What kind of things do we want to accomplish in the world? It's a subtle but important distinction as we think about the kind of work we want to do and how we want to talk about that work. We know, for example, that we can value trees. This is a classic picture from an early days in the Million Trees program in New York City. The people were trying to convince then Mayor Bloomberg about, is this Million Trees idea a good idea? And the figure that won the day was this one, that the trees had an actual monetary value. And that won the day for him, and Million Trees went forward, as it has gone forward in many different communities, not only in the United States, but around the world as well. That's value. That's connected to values, but not only. It's not the only thing that trees are related to. The only thing that green spaces are related to. There are many other types of values, the things that we care about with respect to the green spaces around us, that we want to amplify, create, provide to everyone in our communities. So if we think about values, what kind of cities do we want to create? Well, we want them to be livable. We want them to be resilient. We want them to be sustainable. We want them to be just. Not any one of those things, but in fact, all four of them. Now, many of us tend to work in one of these bubbles or another, but we have to have our work add up to all four of these things, so our cities can be all four of these things. Not just one of them, but all four of them. Why? I think it's self-evident why we would care about such a thing, but one of to state the obvious, it's because our communities are built up of many points of view, many ways of knowing, many opinions about the way the world works and how their communities ought to work. Many of those are contested, and we need to have conversations with everybody in these communities to be able to move forward, to have a shared conversation about values, even when we possibly don't agree with each other. All right, that brings me to this idea of the the Urban Field Station Collaborative Arts Program, this collaboration between the Forest Service and in my organization, Nature of Cities. And there's a couple of kinds of things we do. At the middle of it, we have these arts residencies, but we also do events, and we try to curate these transdisciplinary, beyond discipline conversations between artists, scientists, practitioners, land managers, policymakers, and so on. Principally, we want to put artists together with scientists and practitioners in place-based year-long residencies. We have 12 of them that are operating this year. And here's some of the values that we are talking about. And one of the core ones is to amplify the voices of stewards. How do we talk about these things better, more clearly? Now, this is building on a long-standing Forest Service practice of integrating different points of view and different ways of communicating. It's also something very near and dear to the heart of the beating heart of the Nature of Cities. That one thing we want to say is that this is fundamentally knowledge and idea driven. That we want the artists to be changed by their collaborations with scientists and practitioners. We want the scientists and practitioners to be changed by their collaboration with the artists. That's the fundamental idea of a true collaboration, a true transdisciplinarity, in which we might be changed by the things that we work with together. So in that sense, I want to go through 5 key points about some of these ideas. And first one I've already started to mention, this idea that when we need to describe our cities, but not only with value, but with values, because the way we describe our cities, even when they might be about ideas about green cities, reveals what we truly value. And what we truly value are the things that we're going to actually put into practice. If our green cities are all about recycling and transportation and energy, as important as those things are, if we don't talk about green space and access to green space and so on, then we'll produce a city that is not so good on those green space elements. Part of that is we have to develop more shared definition of words so we can have conversations. I'll talk about this again later, about this idea of the fact that we don't often share vocabulary or the same meaning for common words that we use. But it's only through such a shared vocabulary can we find a basis for conversation about the values we may or may not share about the building of our environment. And this is key. Art is really good at facilitating conversations like this. It relaxes people, it puts people in a different space, it allows us to explore maybe a common idea from different points of view that perhaps we hadn't thought of before. And that's a valuable starter to these kinds of value-based conversations we might not have with anybody around us. Now we do this idea of vocabulary and not shared vocabulary is a gnarly one. We did a roundtable at Nature Cities a few years ago in which we had landscape architects and ecologists in the same conversations, and we asked them, what is it about each other? What is it about landscape architects and ecologists that they don't get about each other but should? Well, the answer is just about everything. The words often don't mean the same thing. Words like wild don't mean the same thing to a landscape architect or an ecologist. Words like evidence don't mean the same thing. And this is deeply important. Here are two disciplines which are hand in glove in terms of the kinds of things they care about, how their views of the world. But for them, the words don't mean the same thing. So words like biodiversity, words like resilience, words like justice, these are all words that we may say, do you believe in resilience? Do you believe in a resilient city? And everybody around the room nods, says, yes, I do. But when you actually unpack it, the devil is in the details, and you would find out we don't actually agree on what that means. These are the kinds of conversations we need to have more of so we can have shared conversation. All right. Number two, through collaboration, we might create something we could not have created for ourselves. This is something I feel so deeply from my theater life, is that they talk of theater being the most collaborative arts. There are lighting designers and set designers and musicians and actors and writers and directors and producers all rowing in the same direction. That direction is a better show. That always has struck me as what a city or a community must be like, or should be like. Lots of different points of view, often contested. I didn't necessarily agree with the costume designer. But we all have the same shared goal, but we have to negotiate what that shared goal might be and then how we would exercise it. The idea of collaboration allows us to see beyond the limits of our particular way of knowing. So not only can we understand someone else's, but we can also maybe communicate our own way of knowing better. Here's an example of the kind of science-art collaboration I'm talking about. This is a really well-known environmental artist in New York, Mary Miss. She worked with a bunch of scientists in Indianapolis, Indiana, to create an exhibit about the idea of where would a 500-year flood be in terms of the water level. And a lot of workshops about the data, about the knowledge, about how to communicate that knowledge. And they came up with an exhibit like this. Is it art? Is it knowledge? Well, it's both. And it's both in very illuminating, vivifying ways. 3, to create those shared conversations, we have to talk to each other. How do we share different points of view? How do we negotiate this idea of difference? How do we even know when difference happens? Now, I want to point out there's a good friend and colleague, an ecologist in Cape Town, Pippin Anderson, wrote in Nature of Cities a number of years ago, the idea of observing, why is it that just about everybody around us wants to be transdisciplinary? They want to collaborate. Why is it so hard? Why do we not do it so well? And she had what I have found to be a very vivid hypothesis about why that is. And that is that it's our very training that leads us to be distrustful of transdisciplinary collaborative acts. What is the fundamental idea of our training? One of the fundamental ideas of our training, and whatever it is, whether you're a scientist of any kind of type or an engineer or even an artist in many ways, is that the idea of how do you recognize what is true? What is evidence for something? An unintended consequence of that training is that we learn to distrust other ways of knowing because it's outside of our discipline. A classic one is the old tiresome trope about physical sciences, biophysical sciences, and social sciences. And this biophysical scientist says, "Oh, that's not science. That's qualitative." Well, that's just, number one, it's not true, and it's an impediment to actually having a conversation that's transdisciplinary. So I've been moved by the idea that it's our training that is one of the impediments to actually having a more vivid transdisciplinary collaborative life. And this is important because the idea of shared values does not necessarily mean we share vocabulary. And perhaps more insidiously, sometimes we can share vocabulary and we maybe don't share values. Well, these are the kinds of things we need to overcome. And again, I want to say that art, science, practice collaborations with art at the center can be exceedingly productive in breaking down some of these trust barriers that occur in these conversations. One that I love, a Mary Mattingly piece, the Floating Bridge, is the idea, an art kind of question, what if? Well, what is a bridge? What is water? Well, and in her case, let's explore the idea of what if the bridge went under the water? And it's a way of turning the conversations around, not to corrupt the conversations or corrupt the questions, but actually to view the questions from a different point of view. We can discover these kinds of points of view in from many different sources. This is a project we started a number of years ago, a crowdsourced website for nature-themed graffiti called the natureofgraffiti.org. And there's a lot of it around the world. And it's very expressive around the idea of, what do people want? What do people desire? What are they angry about? It's a window into the kinds of things that we want to know about as the stewards of the natural environment around us. It's people who move from the country to the city. What do they miss? Here's one from Brazil about complaining of a bridge of lies, about a dam of lies, about a dam that was created in Brazil to create power, but displaces lots of indigenous people without any transparency. And then famous Banksy, of course, from Detroit. 4, let's build place-based collaborative actions to spread ideas and dialogue. And this is idea of putting teams together early in the process. So some of the groupthink of science, some of the groupthink of policy, some of the groupthink of arts might be disrupted by different novel kinds of conversations. Here's another example from Mary Mattingly, in which she observed that the New York City parks plans, you cannot forage. It's illegal. And so she posed the question, well, what if we did something else? And she made a barge, of a foraging barge, which floated around the rivers of New York City, outside of jurisdiction of New York City parks. Not to subvert parks, but to have a different conversation. It turned out to be a teaching barge, a place where the public and science and scientists and policymakers could mix and have conversations about, what does policy mean? How do we negotiate this idea of what we want, what we might have? We can find these kinds of things all over. This is an example of an oral history project in Bogota about, where can I dream? Where is a Bogota that I might dream about? Donde puedo soñar? And I know many of us in around here are creating these oral history kinds of projects, both as storytelling elements, but also the idea of these things can also be sources of data for scientists to work on and explore these ideas. If my 5th point then is search for combined expression from new sources. This is currently an exhibit in action now in Prospect Park in New York, in which an artist, Nikki Lind, puts microphones inside trees or underneath the ground to explore how might we perceive the natural environment around us differently. And I want to make a shout out to this idea of connecting to other kinds of information too. On many of the work we do, the muralists, this work in Prospect Park, we put QR codes on the work. So if people are intrigued by these things, they can dive into other science or conservation or other connections that they might explore more about these ideas. It's an idea about storytelling. We all need to be better storytellers, all of us, about our work, scientists, policymakers, so we can enliven the kinds of important values that we want to share, connect our knowledge and our values to the future. And I think about Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King said, "I have a dream." What Dr. King did not say is, "I have a 21-point plan." The first one is a lot better story. And it's fundamentally true. It expresses a truth that we remember vividly to this day. He told a really good story about something really true. We all need to do better with that. Combined expression in meeting people where they are. Here's my great collaborators in the New York Forest Service, Lindsay Campbell, Erica Svensson, fantastic transformational partners for me in New York around this work. They started with an exhibit combining art and land stewardship that was at the Queen's Museum in 2019. We turned that into a virtual exhibit so more people can see it, more people can interact with it. That's the kind of thing that Edith is going to talk about in a few minutes, a transformation from an in-person exhibit to a virtual one. Another example from Bogota, this idea of a little kid, a landscape architect asked a bunch of kids, draw the landscape around you. What do you think of it? Is it art? Is it knowledge? Yes, it's both of those things, and we can gather these points of view, this knowledge, these modes of expression from many different sources. So Birchfield, values, perspective, improvisation, intuition. These are not words that sit enormously comfortably with the scientists, even some practitioners, but their work is completely embedded with these kind of ideas. That we think of these words as often being art related somehow, but they're also science related and practice related. They're action related. This is the 1 + 1 = 3 of transdisciplinary work. This is the way in which we can put two points of view together and create something, not just the sum of those parts, but actually something greater than the sum of those parts. Art, science, practice joined together can be that 3. And I'm so excited about the kinds of things we might do, the kinds of things we might learn, both teach and learn about the kind of work we do, the values that we have. So it's difficult to take in the glory of the dandelion and the mountain and the thunderstorm. It's an active imagination, an active improvisation in which we can see in new ways something that's very, very complicated. Many thousands of details that add up to something more than those details. And Charles Birchfield wrote in one of his journals, all day to the gateway into September, putting in the huge insect tree in the August part. For the first time in weeks, I let myself go in improvisation and fantasy. I think we could all let ourselves go in improvisation and fantasy, and often, sometimes, hopefully, see something. We might look at something we've seen before, and we see something new, something we hadn't seen before that might be a path forward. Thank you so much, and I'm very excited to be here with you, and I'm also very excited to hear what Edith has to say about some of the work that we've been doing together. Thank you so much.